Hello and welcome to another instalment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adokru. Today we'll be taking a look at Sam Allardyce and discussing whether he's underrated as a coach or has been overhyped by coaches and the press. We'll also take a look at whether he's the man to take the baggies back to the Prem if they do fall. If you listen to this, they might have already fallen down to the Championship, but as things stand, they haven't. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at @yfootball_, and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Betches, good afternoon. How are you?
A different intro. Why'd you go with the good afternoon?
Uh, well, it's just mix things up. Keep people on their toes.
Oh, nice. Good change up. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing the reasoning. No, I'm good, thanks. It's a bit grey today.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's not great weather. So yeah, not much to report on that side. Obviously, was pretty sad after the Europa League campaign from the Gunners midweek. Close to tears, but obviously the rain managed to hide my tears, so that was pretty good. Apart from that, not much else to report. I'm going to stop there talking about Arsenal because otherwise I go on a massive rant about everything wrong about the club and how I want the club to dissolve. So I'll leave it there. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. I missed that game actually. And what I was watching at the same time, which was actually really powerful and really sad, was the Ian Wright documentary on BBC.
Oh, really? Would you give it out of 10?
Home Truths. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10. It was really, really
Really?
interesting about his childhood and child abuse and stuff, abuse in the household, domestic abuse. It was really powerful.
Mm.
Like we don't normally start a pod with such I don't know, serious, powerful messages, but it was really. I'd implore people to watch it. It was really, really sad and really eye opening because I'd seen. Do you remember that clip on? It did the rounds on Twitter and social media where he's on the stands. I think he's still playing, and then like his old teacher um, comes down to basically to meet him because Ian Wright thought he died. And he basically obviously comes down and surprises him. Look, I'm alive. And this guy
Yeah.
was a massive role model because he suffered abuse at home by his stepfather and his mother. So I remember seeing that years ago and not really understanding the context really. So yeah, but powerful powerful stuff to start the podcast. But to kick things off on the big Sam Allardyce Etches, why this episode today?
Well, I just think West Brom have had some decent results recently, and also have lost a few as well, and seem destined for relegation. My boy Maitland Niles, who
Mm.
doesn't actually know I'm alive or exist on this earth, but we are boys. Is been playing there, been playing quite well. Unfortunately, he's probably going to miss it on the Euros. And ages ago, we did a podcast on Slaven Bilic and his time at the club, and he lost his job in the middle of the season. They just drew to City, I believe. I was
Mm.
annoyed because Kevin De Bruyne was my captain that day on fantasy, and he didn't,
Same.
yeah, he
Yeah, I
didn't
remember that day.
score. And it's one of those things where you see quite often in football, right? Where guy gets them promoted, Christmas time, people start getting cold feet because they're in the relegation zones. They go for what I like to call a firefighter manager, who is normally a guy who can save from relegation and can kind of get you to the mid-table
Mm.
sort of level before moving on. And that's kind of Sam Allardyce. He looks like he could lose that tag this season of never being relegated.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to do a podcast on what he represents, right? So many people see his football style as archaic and boring and not fit for purpose, while most recently Pep Guardiola called him a genius for keeping sides in the Prem. So kind of wanted to see which side of the coin he really falls on, and also more importantly, what happens to him next should West Brom go down. I mean, if you're Swansea or someone else, and you get promoted, or Bournemouth get promoted, and you're in that same situation at Christmas,
Yeah.
and you look for someone to turn to, if Sam Allardyce has now got that blot in his book, which is, oh, he got relegated with West Brom, will this affect his career going forward? Does he want to go into the Championship and manage there? It's a very difficult league, so that's kind of what I wanted to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a number of teams go down, keep their managers, and it's actually been better for them in the long run as opposed to, as you said, getting cold feet and sacking your manager. I recall at Sunderland. I'll have no apologies today for referencing Sunderland, given Allardyce's time there, which was, fairly short, half a season, but we were winless after 8 games, and he came in and did a remarkable job. But he was actually on a 2-year deal with us, and he then went to England after that season.
Mm,
And basically, to your points, Sunderland were already, on a spiral to an extent. We were in debt. We had manager after manager, year on year on year. This revolving door. But had he stayed, so many fans have wondered what might have been because, like did build a good side. So he made like unknown signings such as Wabi Kazri, Lamine Kone, who was linked ironically to West Brom for like 15 million at one point from Sunderland. He brought in Jan Kirchhoff from Bayern Munich, who now is nowhere, no idea where he is now. But these all played vital roles in survival. Jan Veer is another one. He was exceptional, one of the best players I've seen play
Really?
for Sunderland. He was exceptional. He was linked to Arsenal, wasn't he?
He was for many
So
years.
many players are obviously linked to Arsenal, so it doesn't really narrow that one down. But I think all the Sunderland fans are wondering what would have happened had he kept that team, because when he left and Moyes came in, a lot of these players seem to no longer want to play for the club. It seems like they were almost playing for Allardyce. Then when he left, it just became even more of a mess, and we ended up relegated and then relegated again. So yeah, I think it'd be
Sunderland got
fascinating to
relegated back.
see.
Sorry. Sunderland got relegated back to back. You haven't told me that before.
Oh right, I thought you were actually having a serious question there, but yeah, we'll move on.
um, kind of moving on to Big Sam's history. There's quite some interesting facts about him actually. So he played 578 league appearances over a 21-year career.
Mm.
I didn't actually know he played football. I didn't
Uh,
actually know
I
that he played.
I
Yeah.
I only knew that because he played for Sunderland. If he'd not played for Sunderland, I didn't. So I didn't know he played for Bolton, for example. It makes sense, but I didn't know he was like such a journeyman of a player.
No, neither did I. I mean, there are a lot of players who actually played ball and you don't actually realize, and he kind of gives off that air of I was a really aggressive centre back and you didn't want to mess with me. So the more I think about it, like Sean Dyche, have you seen Sean Dyche play ball?
No, but I can imagine that so much. I mean, he's the perfect example, not to detract from what we're talking about, but he's a perfect example of a manager that, was relegated with the club, came back. But then, yeah, he would have definitely been the hardest of hard centre halves. It's the way he speaks. I bet he's a lovely guy, but the way he speaks, it's
He's
just so.
he must have swallowed some nails or something because his voice is absolutely mad. There's a video online of him leathering a penalty straight down the middle, centre back
Oh,
style.
yeah. Yeah, you can't kick a football with the inside of your foot, mate. Not if you're Sean Dyche.
Otherwise, he'll call you soft.
Mm.
Right. So moving back on to Allardyce. So yeah, played 578 appearances over a 21-year career across the Football League. You're right, at Bolton as well. He also ventured into North America briefly,
Mm.
which becomes relevant later. He then moved into management, taking charge of Limerick in 1991. Leading the club to the League of Ireland First Division, which is the second tier title in 91-92. He returned to coach at Preston North End as a youth coach, which is interesting. Can't really imagine Allardyce coaching youngsters. I don't know why. I just imagine him making the under 14s doing press ups all the time. But yeah, he worked at Preston North End briefly as a youth coach. His first permanent role was at Blackpool, which I do remember. I had an old flatmate who was a Blackpool fan. He used to tell me all the time in 1994.
Oh, I
But
thought
he
you said you were going to remember. I was going to say you've been 1 year old when that happened.
yeah, I remember seeing it on the telly.
Yeah.
But he got sacked after 2 years after narrowly failing to achieve promotion. And then in
Mm.
97 to 99, he was in charge of Notts County, taking them to the third division title in 97-98. And then he went to Bolton Wanderers, where it kind of all began for him, where
Yeah.
he really built his career. I think that's kind of the point where he really divided opinion. In his autobiography, he stated, "I enjoyed being Arsenal more than anyone else when I was in charge at Bolton. We really got into them, and Arsene Wenger hated us." I think that quote there wasn't just shared by Wenger. I think it's shared by a lot of managers because during that time where it was mostly Man United and Arsenal fighting for leagues and Liverpool as well, he was a very frustrating character to try and get the better of, and he was very successful.
Yeah, and Wenger was also like he loved having a war of words with managers. I mean,
Yeah, he did.
sort of many top managers. So you got to take it with a pinch of salt, I think. Like even what Allardyce is saying, because it is just kind of tongue in cheek, and it is just designed, before the game and sometimes after in preparation for the next time. So it's kind of unsettle one another and each team. Because, like, I mean, Wenger strikes me as being someone who, I mean, he's a pragmatist. He's like Guardiola. Guardiola refers to Allardyce as a genius. I think Wenger would speak positively of Allardyce and what he's achieved in terms of keeping clubs in the Premier League and what he did at Bolton. Because I mean, he's how many seasons has Allardyce coached in the Premier League? Countless.
On that note as well, with Wenger, I think something which needs to be addressed is the best managers or successful managers are the worst losers by far. So a
Mm,
lot of that stuff with the pinch of salt is 100% right, because your Wengers, your Fergusons, your Guardiolas, your Marinos, they love crying after a loss.
mm.
Even Klopp, everyone loved Klopp, and then this
Yeah, it's the
season,
best example, yeah.
yeah, this season obviously it's not gone well for Liverpool. I know he's had some personal issues, but you know when any successful manager starts losing, they are terrible to listen to.
Yeah, what I didn't like about Klopp was the Brighton game when I think Brighton got a penalty, or they got a quite basically got a goal as a result of VAR. I can't recall what the goal was,
Mm,
but he was like, so the Sky reporter was asking him a question about the penalty. Yeah, it was a penalty, and then he
mm,
replied, "Oh, what do you think?" Like being really condescending and really aggressive back to the reporter. Like, don't
mm.
argue with the reporter, man.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes reporters do love winding them up though. But
Mm,
yeah, I kind of back onto Allardyce. I think one of the things I really found out about his career when I was researching him was he was more than just a long ball manager basically. So, his Bolton team was physical and direct, but loads of that was during a time in the Premier League where there was a massive continental style, where we had managers like Wenger and Houllier who were finding success. And I
yeah.
think Allardyce came through at a time where the stock of English managers was very low. The national team was coached by foreigners during that time as well, in Sven Goran Eriksson towards the latter end, and then obviously after that Fabio Capello. But
Mm,
the English manager stock was quite low, and I think Allardyce was kind of a testament to that, where if you wanted to have this new continental style that was all the rave and was seen to be the only way you could be successful, he had to adopt that style. But if he's a genius at keeping people up, as Guardiola said, then that there must be more to it. And even though his Bolton style was very aggressive and very direct, Big Sam actually worked the transfer market very, very well. He
mm.
signed a lot of talent from Europe who are in the twilights of their careers or just after it, and he was able to get them to perform at the club at a very high level. We're talking JJ Kocher, so good they named him twice. Hidetoshi Nakata, Ivan Campo, Fernando Hierro, Jokayev. These are players, some Champions League winners, World Cup winners, and he managed to get them performing at a high level at Bolton. He made it work.
Yeah, like he had a direct style, but he did bring in so much of this talent from abroad that did actually have strong technical ability. I mean, moving almost beyond that, Nicholas Anelka came and played for Bolton, and
Yeah,
they
he
signed.
does.
I believe it was El Hadji Diouf's first club in the Premier League, or did he go to Liverpool first?
Went Liverpool first. Went
Doing
Liverpool
Liverpool
first.
first,
Mm,
yeah. But even him, I mean, he was at Sunderland as well. He's such a petty guy, but he was also very technically gifted. So these are actually like not most of the players you named, maybe not Campo and Hierro, but are technically gifted footballers. And I remember when we were younger, and I would be quite young then as well, not thinking much of these players being at Bolton under Allardyce. But actually, when you look back at it now, some of these players played at top clubs. I mean, Campo
mm.
was at Real Madrid.
Yep.
Like Koch played for PSG, and for them to then go into a side like Bolton, who have already been in the league for so many years, who are managed by this supposed dinosaur or cake style manager that is Allardyce, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, massively. I think what set Allardyce apart from his peers at the time, which is why he was so successful, was his consumption of data,
Mm.
or data science in particular. Apparently, Allardyce was laughed at for having such a large backroom staff when he joined Bolton, with a host of analysts and scientists he brought in. He's also one of the first managers to utilize Prozone statistical metrics to help give him the edge, sorry, in games. JJ Kochak said you couldn't escape stats with Allardyce, which sounds hellish in that example. I don't really want to be involved with it. In more modern times, during his stint at Sunderland, Paul was trying making a comment about Sunderland.
Mm.
Allardyce would set his players' homework on iPads as soon as he took over, saying if a player can digest his own statistical information away from the football club in his own time when he's not under any pressure, without a coach standing over him, it could potentially help him, which is
Yeah.
really interesting in terms
Mm.
of trying to get your points across. Obviously, you need the player to watch it. I think the modern ballers are really into that, but there'll be a few mavericks out there who'll be like, "Oh, do you watch the data I sent you?" Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, cool. Yeah, of course. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So statistical analysis and data science knowledge, aided by his backroom team, they looked into loads of stuff like recovery, fluid nutrition, supplements. I don't even know what fluid nutrition properly means, but supplements, massage, and ice baths, because he believed that all of these could give his team the edge in games. He was also said to be very good at prolonging players' careers. Kevin Nolan said that's one of the main reasons he managed to keep on playing so well under him, because he really looked after his players. And when we're talking about the players he mentioned earlier, we could even add Gary Speed to that list. Those are players that probably needed better managing. They couldn't play 2 games a week or 2 games back to back, maybe. And he was really good at managing those loads with the teams that he had around him.
Yeah, some of them players were mid-30s when they came in,
Mm.
and joined the Premier League, which is a really fast-paced league, and it was then. So, that's definitely a massive contributing factor and would have been at the time, particularly. I mean, that Sunderland fact I actually didn't know. It's quite obscure, but it makes complete sense, really. I mean, at Bolton, he created a war room. I remember reading that in Michael Cox's The Mixer, which is a fantastic book on basically the Premier League years. So he had this war room at the training ground, which had four huge plasma screens, um, which is like a really old-fashioned, almost old-fashioned way now of describing a television screen, but like documenting everything from fitness to pass completion, all these different metrics. And just like Akocha said, you couldn't escape it. So I mean, clearly he was innovative for that time and way ahead of his years in terms of using statistical analysis. Because now, as well, I mean, it's such a given that we use data in the game. And we look at like Leicester City, for example, which I mentioned on so many podcasts, but everyone loves talking about how Leicester utilised data in their recruitment. That's how they picked up players like Kante. But seemingly, this is something that Allardyce was doing 15 years ago, and he
Mm.
was laughed. He was laughed at for doing it. Or he's laughed at for having so much backroom staff. But that's what clubs have now.
Yeah, very much so. I think that the next part of Allardyce's career post Bolton, because he went to Newcastle, I believe, he became something known as a relegation specialist.
Mm.
Which I think I mentioned this later on the pod. I don't really think managers like being known as that because obviously, all managers aspire to coach at the highest level. But
Yeah.
Big Sam was a specialist at keeping some sides that seemed destined to go down up. Back in 2017, he discussed his relegation blueprint, which he
Mm.
said you need to do this to keep clubs up. And what I find really interesting about this is that it's so obvious to me and probably to loads of coaches, but when Big Sam was looking at data analysis and, you look at the analysis of the teams that he took on and coached and how he fixed them, they weren't doing it. So the first point
Mm.
is keep clean sheets. Well, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room to realize if you're not keeping clean sheets, you could go down because I think that he literally gave the example of like, if you're 1-0 down, you have to score two to win, sorry, which is very obvious in football. But, it's still the concept that most of the sides at the bottom are shipping 2 or 3 goals a game or 2 goals a game. Obviously, if you need to stay up and you're probably already struggling to score goals, it doesn't really help you if you have to score two every time you go one down.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
that's what Allardyce is going on about. Don't give the ball away in your own half. Another one which is pretty obvious. Play the first forward pass was an interesting one, which he put down. We talk about that direct style, but Allardyce is very much about getting that ball from box to box as quickly as possible. Win the second ball, something which I assume a lot of managers want, but maybe don't reiterate or kind of push because a lot of the teams now are playing on the ground and are moving it quickly, and it's all about shape and distance and all that sort of stuff. Set pieces are key defensively and offensively. Yeah, look, why can't right? This is to everyone listening in. If you answer this question, I'll give you ten
I know it.
pounds.
I know what you're gonna say.
Why can't players beat the first man on a corner? Too many corners, right? Look, you're getting paid, okay, on average, let's say 30 grand a week, and that's low end in Premier League. I reckon on average it's higher than that. But let's say 30 grand a week is average. 30K a week, and you can't get a ball in past the first man.
What I thought you were gonna say, what I did think you were gonna say is that why don't more sides actually have routines in terms of
I think they do.
offensively?
I think they do
I
now.
Yeah, we possibly do now. But like when I watch sides play, so even when we watched England in the World Cup, and suddenly we had these like routines from corners and we scored lots of goals. Why is that taking so long? Why is it taking until the 2018 World Cup for us to
Yeah,
start doing things like that? I just think it
yeah,
gets overlooked often.
yeah, because Liverpool have and Arsenal now, we have a set piece specialist. We took
Yeah.
Brentford's set piece specialist. We don't score many corners, by the way, FYI. Just disclaimer. But we do. Arsenal do have a few routines. They have one where they all stand by the goalkeeper and they flood out. I've seen that work. Never. They have another one where I think they swing it all the way to the back for a centre half to head towards goal. Normally Gabriel or Louise, and then try and score off that. I've seen that work once. And yeah, but to be fair, defensively from set pieces, Arsenal have looked very solid. So I do get
Mm,
some analysis point on focusing on that.
yeah.
Exploit the oppo's weaknesses. Obviously, I reckon all managers do that. But when you're as pragmatic as Big Sam, that will be a really point you want to hone in on. And final third quality again, we mentioned the players we talked about earlier, your JJ Koches and your Jokayevs. You need a bit of talent up top. Jermaine Defoe at Sunderland. You
Oh
need
yeah.
something, right? You can't.
Yeah.
Often sides do go down. I remember when Burnley went down the first time under Dyche. You they often. I know they actually had Ings at that time, but you need a bit of creativity. Often these sides go down because they don't have a goal scorer, right? And often, even if you're
Mm.
solid and the game's 0-0, You still need to get a few more points to try
Well,
and
yeah, Sheffield United, perfect example. Good
yeah, very good
sides, but
example.
haven't got a goal scorer. So
No, I need that magic in midfield. But yeah, there is 7 points, which is interesting. And I think relegation survival is one of those things in the Premier League which is snuffed at too often. Because not many
mm,
managers win trophies ever. Forget whether they win it at big clubs. There are loads and loads of brilliant managers. I think what we do sometimes is we say X is a good manager because he's won X number of titles, but there's so many levels to that because there are brilliant managers in our time that will never win anything. I think Rodgers is an excellent coach. I'm not too sure he's won anything. No, because the Carling Cup was won by what's that guy called? Michael Laudrup. So they're fantastic managers all the time. They don't win, and I think we often see relegation as something which is just irrelevant, but it's massive in football. It really is.
mm.
And for the other sides in the league outside the top six, except for less that one year, that's something which they have to try and actively avoid. And I think Big Sam, even though he hasn't got the expansive football and the free flowing results, he gets the results at the business end of the seasons more often than not.
Yeah, definitely. And what I think is really interesting about that blueprint you mentioned is that all of those kind of 7 points you mentioned, they can all be proven by data. So he might go into a football club, and there's such obvious footballing kind of, I don't know, these are such obvious points to say to a player, look, you need to keep clean sheets, you need to do X, Y, Z, say that to the team. But actually, if he goes in, he can prove to them, and then they're not doing that. They can say, well, yeah, you might think this is obvious, but is it obvious because you're not doing it? And I can prove it with statistical models, or I can prove it with data. Then that's a really good way of him going in and actually be able to prove from day one that he knows how to basically turn the ship around. And when you've got to
Mm,
think you've got to go in, and I mean, I think we might discuss it later, or we've discussed it before anyway, offline in the pub probably, about whether or not someone like Guardiola could come into West Brom and keep them up. He's got a proven track record of being able to take a losing team who are used to losing and have a losing mentality and turn that around. And I think that's one of the ways in which he does it by using data and using his blueprint to kind of show, look, I've got a proven history of taking teams like you and turn you around. This is the proof. He might even look at his previous clubs and say, look, this is what they were doing on day one. This is what they did when I finally kept them up on last day of the season, like at Sunderland. He might do something like that, and why wouldn't he?
mm.
So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating point. It's Sunderland as well. I don't think he played direct football. It was quite direct in a sense that he was looking for that forward ball often, which as you mentioned, it adds to the blueprint point before. Um, he did look to get it in the feet early, but we actually made a four up top. You couldn't play it long, so I don't
Yeah,
think
true.
playing direct or playing forward often necessarily makes you a long ball style of football. It just means that you are playing the percentages and looking to cause a bit of chaos going forward, which often is the long ball, but isn't always.
No, I completely agree with you there. We should have a timer or like a counter for every time you link Sam Allardyce back to Sunderland. I think it'd be pretty good for
I
this
think
pod.
it's only been like three times, which I think is pretty good. It's been 20 minutes.
No, not sure on that one. So kind of the issues against Big Sam, or where the fraud kind of tag comes from, is whatever angle you look at in football, right? Your football needs to be expensive, it needs to be dynamic, it needs to be entertaining, and if not, people that don't conform to that style are seen as archaic, and football's kind of moved on from that. And even closer, I always say this to people all the time: if you play bad football and okay, not bad. If you play unattractive football
Mm.
and you don't win, those managers get sacked. I would say 20 times quicker than a ball playing manager that's also losing, because it's the case of, oh, well, the football's not bad. We're just not winning now. Whereas
Mm.
when the football is like pretty long ball, Phil Brown style, yeah, you tend to get the beat a lot quicker.
Phil Brown.
Yeah, what a throwback, isn't it? Where is he at now? Wasn't he in
He-
India coaching?
yeah, he was at Southend for a bit. He really plummeted. I mean, I remember the players on the pitch at half time at the Etihad Stadium. That was
Yeah.
just oh god. But yeah, I don't know what he's doing now. Massive
Yeah,
drop.
fair play. Phil Brown, if you're listening, then sorry, that's what I'm going to say. But yeah, Big Sam's football style kind of, it's not easy on the eye, but it does the job. And I think there kind of lies one of the issues against Big Sam is that there isn't one style that has to be accepted to win. But I think that what Big Sam hasn't really done in his career is adapted his methods or achieved enough with them to manage the biggest side successfully. So what I want to say about that is, can he be seen as a brilliant coach or a fantastic coach if he hasn't managed to use his particular style and manage better teams in the league and propel them up the league, right? So I'm
Yeah.
talking predominantly about his time at Newcastle and Everton. Everton were, I think it was just when they started to get quite a bit of money in, and Newcastle as well, obviously with a lot of history and it's a bit of a poison chalice. But both of those clubs wanted, okay, this guy gets results. Can he get results for us to push us towards Europe, which is what both teams at the time wanted to try and achieve.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to do it because I think it's very easy trying to be West Brom and Crystal Palace and try and stifle Arsenal. It gets to a point when you manage clubs like Everton and Newcastle where you need to challenge Arsenal or Man United or Chelsea. I'm not saying challenge in terms of, oh, I want you to go away to Old Trafford and win 9-0, but you expect a bit more. And even more so when you play teams at the lower end. You know, when you're at Newcastle or Everton, they don't expect you to start sitting deep against, I don't know, Sheffield United away. They want you
Yeah.
to be
Yeah,
progressive. They want you
exactly,
to
yeah.
attack. And I think Big Sam hasn't really tinkered his style enough throughout his career to be able to do that. I think those two teams represented an opportunity to really adopt his methods and propel them. But I think what it really highlighted to me, those jobs in particular, West Ham as well to a degree as well, is it highlighted a coach that was good at what he does, but when you move into the higher echelons of the league, kind of struggled.
Yeah, I think it's about going from playing on the back front, playing on the back foot, and then breaking into playing on the front foot, which you need to do, as you mentioned, when you go to be a club, because you are actually then going to start playing against teams that are playing for a draw or are going to be parking the bus. When you're a Sunderland manager, a Crystal Palace manager, fighting relegation, you rarely play against, even if you're like a team that's 16th, the team who's in 19th you're playing against is still going to try and beat you, because if they don't try and beat the teams that are in 16th, they're going to get relegated. They can't park the bus against every team that's above them. So the only team you can say that he's grown is Bolton, because he got them promoted and then they grew into what was quite a good side. So he must have been playing the front foot a lot then, because they were obviously winning a lot of football games, and they would have had to have done that in the old First Division. Like if he goes down with West Brom and he stays with them to get promoted, he's then going to have to be suddenly managing a team that's the top one of the top five teams in the division, or about top two if he's going to get automatics. Um, and so then he has to be playing on the front foot. He's going to be playing against teams that are going to be parking the bus. So then he has to break them down. So I think that'll be a true test when he goes up there. But not since Bolton, not since he took them to the UEFA Cup round of 32 as well in 2005 or six season. Not since then has he really seemingly produced a team that can actually go forward, score goals, and really break teams down.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's just one of those, isn't it, where you kind of need Big Sam to do a little bit more. And at 66 now, which is his
Mm.
age, I haven't just plucked the number out of nowhere. You kind of think where he's running out of time to do that, and that's kind of what I'm moving on to next, which is what next for him.
Yeah.
Now he kind of championed his methods at hailing, and hailed him keeping sides up. But in football circles, he's a firefighter manager, right? And will this relegate when he gets his relegation with West Brom? What highly likely to that'll affect him. There's not many coaches at his age coaching top flight football. Hold tight, Roy Hodgson. But apart from that, there's not too many. So are we seeing the end of his time in top flight? Which I think is quite a valid point. I think Daniel Farke has highlighted. There's been managers before. Sean Dyche is another example, but Daniel Farke in particular, of late, where clubs are seeing people go down and get relegated, but if they keep hold of their stars, and they can get promoted pretty quickly, and I think the firefighter title, your Big Sams, your Tony Pulis's beforehand, is football kind of moving on from them? And if Big
Mm.
Sam gets relegation now with West Brom, we look at his career and we say, okay, you didn't work out West Ham, didn't work out Everton, didn't work out Newcastle. All of the positive teams have been sides that normally are fighting relegation. Do we actually need him? Do we benefit more by keeping someone like Daniel Farke? We accept the relegation, but we get propelled up, in the next year or so. Because otherwise, with Big Sam is okay. We're now 12th. We're solidly a Premier League team. You have to sack him anyway and try and roll the die and get a
Yeah.
more continental style manager. And the problem with that is you kind of start all over again. If you go from Big Sam to, let's say, an old school, I don't know, Maurizio Sarri, for example, it's going to take ages, and you could get relegated in the process because you're trying to change the complete style of how you play football whilst also trying not to get relegated.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's the safe choice to an extent,
Mm.
because as you said, what happens when they then get promoted again and then it falters? I mean, it is. I think it's a positive thing for clubs. I mentioned it before, to keep their managers, and it's often been successful. It was successful for Dyche. It was successful for Rafa Benitez at Newcastle. Scott Parker is a good example of a coach that was brought in mid-term, just how Allardyce has been. Has got relegated and then came straight back up. I mean, ironically, there Scott Parker is likely to then, or is on the verge of getting relegated again with Fulham. But looks like he might stay there, and they might come back up again. because when you keep that manager's already been in the club for a short amount of time. He
Mm.
might already have history of actually getting you promoted. So you're so you actually that's logical, right? To keep a manager that's already got you promoted before. Um, Keep him as the manager because he might be able to do that again. That's not the case with Allardyce, and it'll be interesting to see with Allardyce because he hasn't managed that level since West Ham, but he did get West Ham promoted. And did in West Ham's history the last 10, 15 years, he is still a key part of that because they were in the Championship.
Yep.
He got them promoted, he got them safe, and he established them as a decent Premier League team. A lot of fans didn't like Allardyce at West Ham because the football. He didn't manage to grow that team, like we kind of mentioned before. He didn't manage to do at West Ham, or perhaps he did at Bolton. But West Ham, like Newcastle and Everton, really, they have expectations that, to an extent, there's a bold comment, but are kind of almost bigger than what they are in modern football.
Yeah, I think some fans are more entitled than others because of history or times gone by. I agree. I think West Brom would
Mm,
just be happy as long as they stay in the top flight. I think obviously the episode of the pod is discussing whether Sam Allardyce is a fraud or a genius. I think fraud is
mm,
quite harsh, but it's kind of it's hard to kind of answer it, isn't it? Because in many ways, I think he's really innovative, and there's parts of his game which are heavily underrated and that should be championed. I do
yeah.
think there is a expiry date on managers, though. I always say to you, is 10 years, and managers are normally at the top, and I wonder if his actual style of football has moved on in terms of not. You can't play long ball to be successful. Many sides do, but whether the methods that Big Sam is using are now a bit dated, and other teams have maybe adopted it better than he has, and with his tag that he now has as a relegation specialist, should he lose that with West Brom, it's kind of, what do we kind of take when we take a step back? What do we see Big Sam Allardyce as? I mean, personally, I see him as a coach who's very talented, but it's probably past his best. I wouldn't go as far as saying he's a genius, but I would definitely say he was an innovative coach with a good reputation. But I think now he's kind of past his best days, really. I'm not too sure because as I said, at 66, he's soon to be 70. I can't really see. I have a feeling there may be one more job after this at West Brom, and I don't think we'll see Big Sam coaching for too much longer.
Yeah, I agree. To be fair, I mean, he really is getting in. He's not getting on. He's not spring chicken. But what I think's interesting is what is defined as aesthetic football or good football, because we view good football as in inverted commas or attractive football as innovative because people are doing things or coaches and teams are doing things that perhaps other teams have not done before. Just the way that Klopp burst in the scene with the gegenpressing, which is seen as attractive because it's high intensity and creates a lot of goals. But actually, a data-driven approach, an analysis-based approach to football in terms of exploiting weaknesses and identifying areas of the pitch in which you can gain an advantage is not a means of playing what we view as attractive football, is it? You know, knocking the ball from side to side and playing attractive football and beautiful through balls and Rabona crosses and then Benzema overhead kick. That's attractive football as we view it.
Yeah,
But using data and using analysis to identify a weakness in a fullback, and then literally carrying attacks down that wing to then exploit that and get goals from it is not attractive football. But data is seen as innovative, and so is analysis. So what is the winner? I mean, they can be used in tandem, but I don't think Aldice gets the credit he deserves. I mean, that kind of Mourinho style of almost reactive manager, but it doesn't often lend itself to growing football clubs because at some point you need your own identity to build and to attract players and so I'm kind of on the fence because actually I've got a lot of time for Allardyce, but as you said, he's no spring chicken. The football at West Ham wasn't great and hasn't been good at many clubs. Didn't do well at Everton. I think he would do well at West Brom. I think he'd arguably get them back up, but it's just that long-term vision for West Brom. Where would they
exactly.
see themselves?
So there's two things I kind of wanted to round up with: is how many times have you said spring chicken? And also the second one would be how many times have you linked Allardyce to Sunderland? I reckon the Sunderland and Allardyce tag has been used maybe 10 times. Spring chicken is only towards the end of it, to be fair. You're really
I don't.
using it.
I don't actually fully understand what the term spring chicken means. I mean, I assume it's just because the chickens tend to hatch in the spring.
I don't know. That's a
I don't
question.
know.
That's a question for next week.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about archaic football managers, but I'm just using cliches. I'm like Steve Bruce behind the mic, and I love Steve Bruce as well, even though I'm a Sunderland fan. But yeah, and the Sunderland links as well. I mean, he did so well, mate. He kept us up, but then look what happened. So that was a good time well spent, Aldice. But yeah, so I think we'll wrap up on that note. Cheers. Thank you so much for the analysis and insight on Aldicio himself. We'll find out in the very near future what his fate will be, whether or not he'll stay, whether or not he'll even be kept on at West Brom if they do go down. Looks like they probably will. They're facing Arsenal soon, though, so hope is still there, given the given what's going on at that football club. But yeah, thank you all for listening this week, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, guys.